In March of 1988, New York resident Amaury Rivera traveled to Puerto Rico in order to visit his grandmother. After several weeks, Rivera came back to his home in New York. However, his time in Puerto Rico proved to be especially important to him. Even though many of his relatives were unemployed and more opportunities seemed available in New York, Amaury would move back down to Puerto Rico permanently just 2 months later. Little did he know this decision would change his life forever. In this episode, we will examine the unbelievable alien abduction of Amaury Rivera. In May 1988, Amaury Rivera moved back down to Puerto Rico. Amaury was attracted to the island. The culture, the beaches, and the lifestyle suited him better than the loud, polluted city of New York. Once he arrived in Puerto Rico, friends found him an apartment, and soon he would purchase a 1971 Toyota for transportation around the island. Soon he began working odd jobs, such as waiting tables and running a hot dog stand. With family and friends nearby, life was good for Amaury, and he was happy with his life. That would soon all change, though. On Mother's Day weekend in 1988, Amaury Rivera was asked by his cousin to wait tables and photograph an event at the Casablanca Club. Needing extra cash, Amaury obliged and borrowed his cousin's camera. The event that night was packed, with many people highly intoxicated, and the party going into the early hours of the morning. Around 4 a.m., Amaury packed his things and began heading to his car. He soon left and started heading home on a familiar route. Around 4:30 a.m., Amaury would enter a dense, white fog on the road. The fog wasn't unusual, though, as he had drove this route many times and seen the fog before, late at night. Then suddenly, Amaury heard a noise on the passenger side of the car. It sounded like someone was running next to his car. When he looked over, he was astonished to see there was someone there. It was short, and he thought it was a boy with a costume wearing a mask initially. However, none of that made sense. How could a boy be running and keeping up with the car? Also, why would a boy be out this time of night? As he looked closer, he became frightened. He attempted to speed off, but instead of accelerating, he actually hit the brake and the car stopped. The being was now in front of him. It was clear at this point that it was something else. The being had palish gray skin, large eyes, was around 3.5 to 4 feet tall, and was wearing olive, tight-fitted clothing. As he was staring at it, what he described as a hideous creature, another being appeared right next to his driver's door. The beings then opened both car doors, and at this point, in fear, Amaury passed out. He soon woke up, and to his terror, one of the beings was sitting right next to him in the passenger seat. Amaury was absolutely terrified. He didn't move, and the being would reach out, its long, pointy fingers toward him, touching his forehead. Once again, a frightened Amaury passed out. When he woke up, he was terrified to see where he was. He was in a light, gray room with 14 other individuals, men and women, mostly looking Latino. The room was very peculiar, not appearing to have walls and having some type of optical illusion. The men and women sat in 3 rows, 5 each. In front of them, the 2 beings stood. Soon, another being would come in and greet the group. This being looked human, though. He was around 5'7", with a lean, muscular look. Amaury recalled it looked Latino. It began speaking to the group in perfect Spanish and introduced himself as Amaron. Amaron would state he was human as well, but came from the planet Ka. He stressed he was not there to hurt them. After seeing a group horrified and fearful, Amaury explained the other beings were harmless and were created by his people. He would go on to say that they were going to show them some projections. The projections weren't real though, he stressed. The group began looking at a gorgeous landscape and were in a lush valley. They weren't looking at a screen though. The entire room had transformed into a beautiful land. The human-like being and the small alien stood, watching the group. They were instructed to look at the sky. Soon the group began ascending and were eventually over the trees. They kept hovering and soon were well above Earth in space. They eventually reached what Amaury told them was Ka's solar system, heading toward the planet. The being, who Amaury named the instructor, would begin to lecture the group on how humans had destroyed the planet Earth. During this time, Amaury would take notice of what was happening to the others around him. He was somewhat paralyzed, but he heard crying, trembling, vomiting from others. As they descended into the planet Ka, the land appeared gorgeous. From high up, Amaury noted that there was just one large continent with an ocean surrounding it. As they got closer to the ground, Amaury could make out a few more details. There were flowers everywhere, and eventually they flew over one of the towns. There, they saw glass pyramids, which the being told them were homes. The ground looked like it was a grass carpet, according to Amaury. They also noticed human-like beings. The beings waved at the group. There were mothers holding their babies, and Amaury remembered everyone was naked. Generally, the place was beautiful. While they watched the beings, it was complete silence inside the craft. The instructor would begin to tell the group about their people. According to him, death was very unusual. Amaury recalled not seeing anyone that looked over 25, and the being said at a particular age, people stopped aging. The instructor told the group that when they get injured, they are capable of regenerating quickly. The tour of the planet Ka continued, and the group would be shown several other places. This included the government center and also a farm that was tended by beings that looked like the smaller ones that had first taken him. Eventually the group came back to the original landscape and the projection faded. The instructor began talking directly to each person. He stressed that we needed to start taking care of the planet, and he stressed that it had to happen. He called each individual one by one. When he got to Amaury, he was so scared he couldn't look him in the eye. The being wanted him to take care of the flowers and the trees. While the first projection was mesmerizing, albeit frightening for everyone, the second projection would be downright terrifying. The second projection began with a group in Puerto Rico looking up in the sky. As Amaury looked up, he noticed a massive rock, like a meteor, heading toward them from outer space. It was getting closer and closer. Even though it was a projection, the realism of the event can't be understated, as others began to faint, and Amaury himself was extremely frightened. It soon slammed into the ocean, creating a massive tidal wave that headed toward the group and the coast of Puerto Rico. It eventually hit shore, and Amaury recalled hearing others scream. Below in the carnage, the group could see washed-up homes and the island completely covered by water. All of the group, the men and the women, were horrified and crying uncontrollably at the sight. They could feel the event. They heard the sights and the sounds, as well as saw the death and the destruction. After this, Amaury would have his seat move toward the front for the third projection. The third projection was even more terrifying than the second. The beings took the group to the White House and began to lecture them. He stressed that the governments were purely self-serving and that they only looked out for their own interest. In the projection, the White House shook and crumbled to the ground. The instructor informed everyone that earthquakes and tsunamis would become part of everyday life in the future. The projection showed severe homelessness, starvation, and people in encampments. The instructor told them that the sea, too, would become polluted, and all life there would die. The population on Earth would sharply decline. The instructor went on to say that the rich and powerful would be okay. They would meet on a man-made island named Atlantis when the chaos began, leaving the common man and common woman behind. On the island, the people that ironically caused the disaster lived well. They would experience no suffering, and no one would be allowed to come and go from there. The island was shown to the group in detail. It was a pretty place, like paradise, with ice cream shops, people riding on bicycles, and lavish parties. The rest of humanity, though, was suffering as they struggled to find food, clean water, and medicine. In time, a gigantic earthquake would occur on Earth, destroying the planet, even the private island. The group was shown a view of it from space, and they could see a dust cloud formed over it. The group would then see an image of a group of survivors on Earth. A giant craft came down and saved the group, taking them to another planet. The instructor informed the group that when Earth became healthy again, they would take them back. The smaller creature then went around one by one, touching people on their foreheads. As it touched someone, he or she passed out. Eventually, it touched Amaury Rivera's head, and he passed out. Amaury soon woke up in his car. However, he was in a different place. The road was not the one he was on earlier. He looked up in the sky and saw the craft hovering away. At the same time, he heard military helicopters and planes coming to the area. He was still crying and overwhelmed with emotion from his experience. He stepped out of the car and snapped a few pictures before the craft flew off into the sky. He then proceeded to start driving, and after stopping and asking for directions several times, he finally arrived at home. He was exhausted and collapsed into bed and slept all day and until the next morning. He seemed to forget what had happened to him that day. A few days later, he gave his cousin back her camera. His cousin would develop the film and call Amaury. She asked over the phone what were the pictures. A confused Amaury wasn't sure what she was talking about, so he went over to her home. As he went through the photos, he was horrified to see photos of the beings and the UFO. He saw the instructor and felt a deep sense of dread. His memory of the event somehow had been blocked, and he remembered the initial encounter. However, he couldn't recall what happened to him after he fainted until the time he woke up in his car. That truly terrified him. Amaury left his cousin's home quickly. Rushing home, climbed into bed in the fetal position. His family tried for hours to open the door, but he was non-responsive. He would suffer PTSD for quite some time after the event. His family was extremely concerned, but in time, he seemed to come with grips with his experience. Still terrified, it would take some time before he would tell his full story to anyone. In the following months and years, his experience got out, and he would encounter many strange government people. On one occasion, 3 agents, claiming to be from the CIA, came to his house. They demanded the photos and the negatives, and if he didn't provide them, they said they would make his life extremely difficult. The men came in the home and searched even, but couldn't find the photos. Eventually his photos would make it into the public and are considered quite credible. Amaury only released 4 of them from the event. In one of them, you can clearly see a military aircraft and what looks like a UFO. The photos were sent for analysis, and there was no evidence found of any type of tampering or altering. Interestingly, according to ufologist Colonel Wendell Stephen, the human-like alien known as the instructor that abducted Amaury has been reported by other abductees in the Puerto Rico area. There have been several cases in which that particular alien was reported all over the island, especially in the southwest part of the country. In addition, other abductees reported some of the same details that Amaury revealed. The Amaury Rivera case is certainly a fascinating one. There's quite a bit to unpack as far as what happened. To begin, the alien's message about protecting the Earth is one we hear time and time again with alien encounters and abductions. For example, we saw this in the Ariel school incident in Zimbabwe. There are other cases as well of abductees being shown projections or images. Still, it is tough to know how prevalent this is because it seems many are having their memories wiped. It appears in Amaury's case that if it had not been for the photos, he may have forgotten the event. It's not entirely clear whether the beings did wipe his memory or if the trauma was just too much and his subconscious buried the memories. While the Amaury case seems like something out of science fiction, the case appears to be quite legit. The witness appears credible and clearly suffered quite a bit after the event. By all accounts, Amaury Rivera was a happy, carefree man, and after the event, he became isolated. For quite some time, he worked and simply came home, refusing to go out at night. This case does raise some interesting questions though. For example, why were middle-class Puerto Ricans being tasked with changing humanity? It would seem more logical for the beings to abduct more powerful men and women if they truly wanted change. Another question concerns the projections themselves. The first projection shows the beauty of the planet Ka, but no one was invited to the home to stay. Nor was anyone given specifics around how they achieved such a utopia. The second projection has to do with the meteor. Is this what the beings plan to do to us if we don't clean up our act? This is what seems to be implied from this projection. The third projection shows the collapse of Earth. The beings seem to imply we are responsible for the daily earthquakes and tsunamis. At this time, there doesn't appear to be any weapon, to the best of our knowledge, that can create these or alter nature this much. So the second and third projections appear to contradict themselves in terms of the message. One implies they punish us. The other is that through our actions, we punish ourselves. Many believe Amaury imagined the whole event. This is a valid concern, but much like the Carlos Diaz case on a prior episode, the photos appear to be pretty solid support. One final thing that must be pointed out is the message delivered to Amaury may have been misinterpreted. Even he admits this. Still though, it appears overall this is a solid case, and hopefully these beings have stopped their abductions.